All right, let's do this thing, shall we? I got 2 buttons left to press. And then one more. Boom. And here we go. Oh my God, thank you for subscribing. That's awesome. Why is my I gotta move that up. Hang on. I did see that. Thank you so much for resubscribing. That's awesome. It literally changes my entire day. So thank you. It's great. Thanks so much. It means a lot. It really does. And on a day like today, it definitely means a lot. Tonight, it's okay, I have to point out that like 3 minutes before I pressed the button to go live, I was really thinking like I should go get a cookie. There's cookies downstairs. I could go get a cookie. And then I realized like, no, then I'm going to start chewing it. And I'm going to be chewing it on the microphone, and that will somehow be a problem. But please know that there is some portion of my brain currently dedicated to cookies. Sorry. Anyway, hi everybody. Hi, thanks for being here. It's wonderful. I'm glad. I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. This one's going to be a thing. This one's going to be a big, complicated deal, because I don't think anybody's ever done this for free, and I'm doing it for free because it should just be done for free. Because it should just be done for free. This is dumb. We can all do better, and it's not exactly a big secret, and it shouldn't be a big secret. So let's do this for free tonight. I am walking you through all the way through idea development, planning, writing, executing, publishing, marketing a best-selling series. Now, best-selling is a little misleading. Best-selling is just going to be series that sells well. Is probably an easier word or an easier phrase to use, because I can't guarantee, nobody can guarantee best-selling, at least when it comes down to certain lists and certain awards. So let's just call it a series that sells well. And I've been toying with this as a stream topic for ages, just ages. But I always had some reason not to. There was always some like, oh well, no, that should be paid content. That's somebody else is doing that better. Somebody else is doing, it in 97 installments, and you could be doing that. It pressed a lot of buttons, and eventually I just got real frustrated with things and was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. Whatever. The internet, internet can get mad at me for giving away the store, or people can get crabby at me on Twitter because somebody over the weekend said I was ruining the publishing industry by doing how-to streams. And I wanted to point out to them that my audience is not exactly like huge. And if I'm harming the publishing industry by, making writers do better stuff, I'm okay with ruining the industry if writers end up writing better, Yeah, it was a really weird sort of Saturday afternoon, random, like, what's this comment? I'm ruining the industry. Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to go finish vacuuming the bedroom now. Neat. But yeah, it's been on my mind since then, and it's been a day. It's been a long day. So I'm very glad to wrap up my day talking into this microphone with you on the other end, because I don't know if I've ever mentioned the number of human beings who come to me in some sort of editorial or coaching point of view and go, hey, I'm writing a series. And then I go, okay, tell me about it. And then they don't, or they start and then they stop halfway because they run into a point where they don't know what to do. And I'm like, oh, I can help you here. And I'll start explaining what I'm about to explain to you, and they glaze over. So hopefully, I've managed to spend most of the day talking my way through this. So hopefully it's not too dense and it's not too vague. And unlike last time, I'm not flying at like 22 million miles an hour through it. Hopefully. Thankfully, there's not a lot of jargon this week in this sort of topic. It's all terms you know. There might be one or two things, and if I run into them, I will define them. But by and large, you're going to know all the terms we're talking about. And I think before we even get into this, before we even dive in, I have to make a couple assumptions. I have to make a couple just sort of baseline, we have to agree to some ground stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to be here giving out individual, here's how you rate your series, and here's how you rate your series, and here's how that third person rates their series. And I'm happy to do that. I love doing that. I love individual appointments. That's fantastic. But my goal here into this microphone is to give a general, broad, big picture so that anybody, whether they come to me for a private or not, anybody can listen to this at length and go, oh yeah, okay, cool. So my plan is to give you a blueprint. But first, before we get to the blueprint, we have to agree on some stuff. I am assuming that you out there listening to this, whether you were listening right now on Twitch, and judging by the little box I have over here in the corner, there are a few of you watching, and that makes me very happy. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, thanks. Hi, YouTube in the future. And if you're watching this after, sort of tomorrow, I guess it is. When am I going to put this up? Tomorrow, Tuesday. Hi, everybody. If you're watching this, please know that I love you very much, and it's thank you for watching this. And I can't possibly guess what it is you're writing, so forgive me if I don't exactly speak to the specific, down to the nth degree thing you're making. When we have to go a little bit general. I have to make some concessions, though. One, I have to assume that the person watching this, whomever they might be, or listening to this, or whatever it is you're doing, you are a pretty typical consumer of pop culture. Two, that you are intending to write a series, on purpose. You're not just writing a book, and then if it does well, you'll somehow, some way think of a sequel. I mean, you are, from the jump, intending to write a series. That's what your plan is. And three, that you haven't started yet. Now, that's important because I need to cover the entire field here. So if you are in the middle of writing stuff, that's fine. Just understand that some of this early stuff you might already know, or you might have already done. And I'm not doing that because, you did it wrong. Maybe you didn't. I don't know. But I'm laying the groundwork out in the beginning because maybe you want to come back and re-examine the stuff you have done and go, oh, I didn't think about that, or oh, I didn't realize that was a thing. So I'm starting from the beginning, and I'm going to treat this as though the person listening has not started yet. And if you have, I'm okay if you kind of tune out the boring part that front, back, and center. It's going to get unboring pretty quickly, but I got to try and appeal here. So if you'll forgive me for not immediately jumping to the, okay, here's the writing part. Cool. Those are my ground rules. Those are my basics. My last little note before we jump in here.
One moment.
Hang on. Why is that doing a thing? Sorry, that was my phone. It apparently heard me say things. So anyway, that really threw me for a loop. I'm real sorry, guys. I wasn't expecting the phone microphone to pick up from whatever. Okay. Last disclaimer. I can't possibly predict all the genres that you could possibly be writing. And I want to make really, really clear that all this stuff I'm going to talk about for however long it's going to be, at least 90 minutes, all of this stuff is independent of genre. You could be writing whatever genre you want. You want to do romance, you want to do science fiction, you want to do fantasy, you want to do urban fantasy, legal thriller, women's fiction, philosophical, semi-fiction, comics, just whatever. Insert genre here. I'm going to try and keep this as genre neutral as possible, although I have to tell you, I got a couple examples that highlight a few genre things. But by and large, all this stuff's going to apply no matter the genre, and no genre does this differently. It's all the same. So whether we're talking about science fiction or whether we're talking about fantasy or whether we're talking about new adult erotica or whether we're talking about middle grade adventure story, all these rules apply. Cool? Cool. So now we're going to begin. Here's where we start. We have to start with two decisions. So we have not put pen to paper, fingers on keys yet. We are starting with two decisions. You're probably going to guess one of them. You probably will not guess the second. Here we go. The first decision I want you to think about, because writing is the act of making decisions. That's how the stories happen. We make decisions. That's the whole job. The first decision I need you to make when you're intending to craft a series is, how are you going to publish this? See, this matters. This is important. This isn't just like, a thing we think about after we're done writing. We think about it up front. Just a little. Because what we choose and how we decide to publish is going to inform not so much the story elements we choose, but how we apply them and how we talk about them. Here's what I'm talking about. Because there are two ways we could publish this thing. We could publish it traditionally, and we could publish it ourselves. One is not necessarily better than the other. I have personal preferences in one direction over the other. You may also have preferences in one direction over the other. We don't have to agree on what is the one true way here. It's more a matter of you just have to pick something. If you're going to go traditional, seeking representation from an agent, pimp, or go straight open to a publisher, that's fine. But I need you to know something first. I need you to know that publisher, whomever they might be, as big four or small little house might be, your series, once you sign that deal, is sales dependent. I understand the contract might say you're on the hook for 3 books or 4 books or 5 books or 2 with an option for 2 more or whatever it says. I understand that's what the contract says. I get that. But if you don't hit the sales goal, there will be no further books. So let's say you produce your debut. You got your first book, the first book in the series, right? And let's say our sales figure, every publisher is going to set a different sales figure, and every publisher is going to set a different sales figure per book, per series, per author. So you might have a second series with the same publisher with different goals entirely. But for right now, we're just dealing with debut book, book number 1, book uno. Usually that sales number that aim for is 80% or higher of their estimated sales quota. You got to sell this much to ride the ride. It's a lot. And especially for a new author who maybe doesn't have a groundswell of marketing or a lot of familiarity or a lot of prep, frankly, done, it can be a lot and it can be intimidating. And part of that's by design. Part of that's just the nature of capitalism. But you're going to have a number that you have to reach. Sell this many books, and then you get to write the next one. Now, you wrote the first one, so you got one. And if it sells well, they'll authorize a second. But if that second book, for whatever reason, let's say, doesn't sell well, it doesn't make its sales goals, even though your contract says 3 books with an option for more, or 2 with an option for 3, or 4 with an option for 1, or whatever it says, the publisher has all the power here. They're holding all the cards in our card game. And they can go, you know what, we're done. And there are loads of different things they can do, some more ethical than others, some more kind than others, some more immediate than others, to terminate this arrangement with you. And then you have to wait X number of days, weeks, months, years to get the rights back. But depending on how the circumstances work out, this is what you get a lawyer for. Depending on how the circumstances work out, it might be a while before you are able to reclaim those books or reclaim the ideas for those books and produce books 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, under a different banner or by yourself or whatever. That's That's a different thing. That's a different animal. Probably a good Monday night topic, but frankly, it's not this topic. The point I wanted to make here is that when you tie your little red wagon to the traditional model, you are tying it to sales numbers. And if you are somebody who is not a terribly confident marketer, if you are somebody who doesn't have a great deal of people and support structure underneath you to convert into an audience or to mobilize and catalyze people, then you are possibly going to struggle that way. Yes, these things can be learned. Yes, you can. There's loads of things you can do to make this happen. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's not impossible. It's pretty doable. It just requires a little bit of effort and a little bit of education. But when you go traditional, you are signing up for sales. They are very numbers driven more than anything else. Get your numbers up. Bring in those dollars, and then doors open or close accordingly, I guess would be the word I'd want to use. Now, you might say, well, okay, fine. I don't want to deal with sales numbers. I'm going to do this myself. We're going to go to the other side now. We're going to look at self-publishing. Well, self-publishing doesn't get away. Like, self-publishing isn't the land of milk and honey and Shangri-La here, because instead of tying it to sales numbers, you're tying your little red wagon to audience size. Because if you have, it is expensive. As somebody who makes their living adjacent to self-publishing is expensive. But you're tying your horse, your little red wagon, your little insert metaphor here, you're tying that thing to your audience size, your ability to grow your audience, your ability to grow new people into your audience, your ability to sustain that audience, whether through the power of content or quality or whatever. It's no more. It's still somewhat salesy, but instead now of seeing it in terms of like you have to sell X amount and therefore earn this much. Oh. Why did I ban that word? Sorry, hang on a moment. I will fix that later. Yeah, I didn't know that word was flagged. I apologize. Sorry, we're coming back now. Self-publishing. Over here to audience size, because they've got to grow. Because it does you no good. Because you can produce books cheaply ad infinitum until the cold death of the universe. But if no one is reading them, because you originally intended to produce this for other humans to read, yes? This wasn't just a challenge to see if you could do it. We're trying to make a business out of this. We're trying to make a cooperative relationship between you, the producer, and they, the consumer. So you need to have consumers on the other end of this equation for it to balance, for it to work. So you need to be able to grow that audience. You need to be able to develop that audience. Oh, it flagged it for bullying, it says. Well, I'm fine with it. It's fine. Well, sorry. It was just going to blink at me until I clicked it. I apologize. Anyway, audience growth. Audience growth is critical, absolutely critical. And your ability to grow that audience is somewhat similar to your ability to generate sales or generate leads for sales. There's somewhat the same tools applied differently. But it's still really critical. In fact, it might even be more so because you are wearing all the hats in self-publishing. You are publisher, you are editor. Well, you shouldn't be editor. You are publisher, you are marketer, you are content farm, you are writer, you are shipping, you are all. This divide needs to be discussed first, because you need to know how to grapple with this. Because let's say you're going to go traditional, right? We're going to hitch our number to sales. You should not, let's be real clear, should not go out of your way to think of stories and think of plots and think of trends and write exactly what you think will sell well. That's the coward's way through this. That's the lazy, sloppy writer's way through this. You're better than that. Your reader deserves better than that. If you'd like to be a chicken shit creative, I'm sure there's other channels somewhere on the internet that will probably encourage you to hate people who look different than you. But all the same, find that content elsewhere. I don't want you to take the easy way out. I want you to roll your sleeves up. I want you to get excited about the prospect of becoming better at this thing you love doing. So instead of catering to trends, instead of immediately jumping on what's popular, even though it's faster, I want you to think about, well, how would I talk about my story in a way that could facilitate a sale? I don't want to come at them all elbows and furious teeth, gnashing and swinging my arms and freak somebody away from selling. I want to approach my topic. I want to talk about my stuff in some particular way so that it's accessible to you, so that you're interested, so that you're provoked, so that I evoke emotion in you, so that you can say yes, so that I can't necessarily guarantee a sale, but I can very strongly encourage it because the way I've appealed to you made sense to you. No trends, no cashing in, no race to the finish line, just decision making, just organizing some stuff. Okay? Let's cross the divide. Let's come over here to this other side. I'm over here now. We're in self-publishing. We're tying it to audience. Again, we're not trying to write middle of the road, safe play, homogenous, beige, bland, garbagey writing that seems very much like everybody else. It's just kind of tame and dull. No, we want to be you. We want to see your stuff on the page. We want to see your fingerprints. We want to get your ideas out there. We want you to be you because you are the generator of this story and you are the engine that makes this whole thing run. And again, rather than try and pick the safe things and play it safe because you know that'll get some audience and won't risk others, I'm encouraging you to think about how you can talk about your work so that no matter where your audience is, no matter what individual you're talking to, oh, it's somebody from this circle, somebody from that circle, somebody from this circle, somebody over there for that circle, you are able to, whether it requires code switching, whether it just requires organizing your thoughts and having a brain in your head, you are able to put together lots of different approaches, lots of different techniques, lots of different attempts in a way that makes your audience go, yeah, I'm down for that. No trends. No chasing. No doing what everybody else is doing. Nor is it the tech bro hustle grind culture side where we're just going to constantly swim upstream and intentionally try to bash our head against a wall until somehow we find that 1 in, 4 quadrillion chance that all of a sudden the molecules of the wall phase into the molecules of our foreheads. I'm not talking about that. Not even close to that. But the first decision is, how am I going to publish this? Because that tells us more or less how we are going to orient ourselves through this first marathon that we are now running. Because now, from this point forward, we are writing this book. And that's our first marathon. There will be another marathon later when we get to trying to turn this story into a book for other human beings. But for now, it's just you, me, and the manuscript. Okay? That was our first decision. Clear? Because we're about to get to our second decision. And again, it's probably a decision you're aware of, but not in the way or degree that you've probably thought about it. Second decision. And then I promise we're going to get to the writing. Second decision directly leads to the writing, though. How are we going to start building this series? We have to start somewhere. We have to start with something, some piece of story fuel. What do we start with? How do we choose? Well, what pieces are available to us? There are 3. 2 are great. 1 is very not great. It's not impossible, but it's very clearly a bad choice that would highlight fairly weak storytelling instincts. You see it a lot in, well, we'll talk about it. It's going to be clear in a second why one choice is the lesser or the least good of the three choices. For now, here are the things we can start with. We can start with character. We can start with plot. We can start with world building. The three pieces of our story triangle, right? There are major sources of story fuel. If we are crafting a series from the jump, if we go into this knowing we want a series, we want to start either with character or plot. Not, and this is like big, where's my air horn? Hang on. Not world building. And if you're sitting there listening to this going, why not world building? Here's why not world building. Because no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, if the only constant in your story, the greatest thing you spend the most amount of time on, no matter where the story goes, no matter what twists and turns, no matter who's doing what, the greatest thing is world building. You have this complicated lore, this incredible, deep, rich history of made up things that you've been making up and making up and making up forever. All that's going to do for the reader, because remember, the reader doesn't know any of what's in your head until they read. So they don't know how you've been thinking about this since you were a small human. They don't know how, you filled journal upon journal of this, that one summer you got sick. They don't know that you've been, essentially masturbating your way through your own development process the entire time on social media just because you're bored and you hate your job. They don't know any of that stuff. They also don't give a shit about any of that stuff. The writers who lock into world building and claim they have this deep, rich lore will almost always create stories that lack something that ties them together. Because if the only constant in our performance is a play, the only constant in our performance is the stage, I should say, then, oh, hey, look, it's somebody I can ban. That's cool. Neat. Anyway, if the only constant is our, hey, there's a bot. Yeah, I see. I know. I got you. I will take care of it in a second. Give me a minute. Done. Cool. Anyway. Yes, I know there was a bot. And then the system will pick it up in a second. But anyway, if the only constant is our stage for this performance, the story's never going to feel like it stitches together. The reader will get lost. The reader will get absolutely confused that, oh my God, there's like 25 people going on and nothing really seems to stick together. Nothing ever really seems to attach to one another. Or worse, nothing seems like it attaches to anything else and everything feels a little flat because it's going to seem way less developed than your backdrop. I'm really, let me just speak for a minute to those writers who were like, but I have all this deep lore. I'm happy for you. Hey, right here, look at me. Hey, buddy, check this out. I'm really happy for you. I am. I'm sincerely happy for you. But that attitude, that strategy might have worked back in the day, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago when you were a younger writer, hashing your way through, just figuring out how to put words together and banging them around to tell a story. But now we're swimming in deeper waters. And the frankly immature approach is only going to serve to bog you down. I want you swimming. I want you moving out here in rougher waters. I want you pushing yourself a little bit. You can do this. You deserve to do better than have an underdeveloped sense of story structure. You deserve better storytelling instincts. You deserve better success. So come on. Let's put a little more work in. Let's get past how cool it is that you made this stuff up and do something with it. I'm not saying you got to throw all your world building out the window. I'm just telling you, it's going to be lost on a lot of readers. And it's not going to do all the things you think it's going to do. It's just not built to do that. It's cool when we're down on the floor with our toys and we're just playing around, and all of a sudden there's like a little sidebar where we're telling the story about the 3 Lego guys. But we're in chairs now, and we're talking about books. Things change. So we do work with character or plot. That's our decision. That's our thing. Do we want character or do we want plot? One is not better than the other, but they are different animals. We're going to cover them both. I'm going to start with character because it's a me stream, so of course we're starting with character. If you start with character, you are going to want to start with what's called an open character. Open refers to being open to opportunity, open to growth. So that is a character who has the potential to grow, improve, change, fail, succeed, transform in some way, up or down, over the course of however big, however long the series is, so that they are not the same person at the end that they are in the beginning. Some parts are going to remain the same, because that's how storytelling works. But by and large, there's going to be transformation. There's going to be a difference, and it should be distinct. The little nerdy kid grows up to be the competent, take charge guy. The nervous housewife becomes the strong, independent voice. The rookie day one suddenly becomes a seasoned veteran in the sport. There's some marked transformation, and they're generally going to be positive. It is much harder to work downhill, work towards a negative transformation, because the audience, the readership, is going to expect some kind of transformation or some kind of positivity to come out of it. You can write a story where characters are in decline. Just understand that it's going to require some different marathon running when we go talk about marketing and we go talk about getting the story out there. So for now, we just have to talk about how to make a character open. And listen, we're gonna back up half a step and go back and talk to those people who were all goo-goo and gaga over the world building. If your solution, if your methodology to building that open character is to give them a hyper-complicated backstory, or a backstory that is told almost entirely in vignettes. Oh, they went over here for this character and did this. They went over there for that character and did that. They went over here and did this and this and that. And they ran into this person and they know this person and they know that person. And you're essentially accruing an address book for this character. That's not open. Knowing loads of people does not mean your character is inclined to, wants to, or will change in any way. I remember everybody I went to high school with. In zero ways does knowing those people, just knowing they exist, and remembering that, oh, I sat next to that person, in zero ways does any of that make me go, yeah, I should be a better person in my 40s. The two things are entirely disparate. They don't connect. They're not going to suddenly magically connect. You only remember 3 people you went to school with? I'm sorry. I remember them. I can't say I'm friendly with. I mean, I don't know what happened to half of them, but if I sat down, I could probably name most of them. I'm not really sure. I mean, I know 6 of them are dead. Maybe 8 at this point, but yeah, I still remember them. Oh, there was that kid, and that kid, and that kid, and those 2, whatever. I understand. I mean, things happen, life changes, brains are brains. For me, I remember those people. But just because I can remember that, oh yeah, I sat next, there was that kid who sat next to that kid who sat next to that kid. None of that knowledge. Remember that time, they were on the hockey team together. None of that anecdotal evidence is what's going to lead me, the main character of the story, go, oh, I should be a better person. It's a lot like saying, oh, there are my neighbors. I'm going to change my life now. They're 2 totally different things. You want to create an open character that has stuff for them to grow, transform, change, affect, or deal with. No matter what plot happens in the story, no matter what, we haven't even gotten there yet. There needs to be some kind of question, some kind of conflict, some kind of space that going through a story can help develop things to fill. A character who needs to learn how to stand up for themselves can, over the course of a story or the course of a series, learn progressively how to stand up for themselves. There's some kind of absence, some kind of space that gets filled in by the character being part of the story or the series or both. When that transformation, when that growth, when that change occurs in a single book, we call that a character arc. When that transformation requires multiple books to do, that's a series character arc. Generally, your individual single book character arcs are distinct from your series character arcs. In the same way that, like, my specific dinner tonight does not represent my dinners forever. I mean, I'd be very happy to eat the same dinner forever. I'm a guy who likes a good routine, and dinner tonight was fucking amazing. But all the same, you want to make sure that you've got your distinction and you're aware of the distinction between what is your in-book singular character arc and your series character arc. And we will get to, this idea of, like, should you have both? We'll get there. Hold your horses. But we create this absence so that some kind of story, some kind of stuff can do or occur or make or lead to the character doing something to fill it. You don't want your character in a state where they're okay with their faults, with their absences, with their errors, with their issues. I'm not talking about how they can, they tell everybody they're okay, but inside they're really not. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how it doesn't really matter to them. It's no big deal if they change or not. That's usually a sign of either one, you didn't make the conflict or the challenge big enough for the character to really give a shit about it, or two, you have failed to describe it in a way that makes it engaging for somebody else. You need to give more detail. You need to spend more time on it. You need to say more words about it. The reason we start with this as our foundation, as opposed to plot development for our foundation, is because when we have a single character, or if you're writing MPOV or an ensemble, the same sort of core nest of characters, you turn those characters or character into an axis, particularly a series axis, which is the sort of the center point around which the whole series turns. This might be a protagonist or a group of protagonists who undergo, life across 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 22, 37 books or whatever. The characters are the constant. The world around them changes. Their characters themselves change. Growth, transformation, age, death, lunch, whatever. Things change for the characters. But the characters are your axis. The benefit of doing that, the benefit of this, the big plus, the big giant, oh my God, this is what makes it so great, is that the reader can immediately relate to it. The reader can immediately attach to it. Oh, yeah, I can follow this character. As long as you make the character appealing and you're fairly consistent with plot and world building, no matter where you take the story until you radically go off the rails, a reader will stick around for a while if your character axis is strong enough. When it's not, you start verging into that territory where your stories are inconsistent and where some books are very clearly better read, better written, better whatever, better received, better sold, better whatever, better than others, and you're picking and choosing. Oh, skip that book. Pick the series up here. Or you see this with television shows and things where it's like, yeah, just watch these seasons and then stop here. Or, the whole series should have stopped after 6 seasons and not gone on for another 9. Or everybody knows it should have ended here. We want to try and avoid that situation. And we can do that early on in the planning stage by organizing what we're thinking and making decisions about it. So we have our character, and we have our ability to distinguish, as an author, our ability to distinguish what this one book, because it's just the first book we're talking about, the first book's character arc, and whether or not that character arc feeds into the series character arc. You do not want to have the one book character arc be 1/3 of the series character arc. That works great in television. It works less well in prose. Why? Because television's visual. And there's a whole lot of other production techniques that are used to develop that story, like lighting, sound, acting, etc., that you can't possibly engineer just writing text. So don't bother. Just spare yourself the frustration. Your character arc should be a thing that transforms the character. You don't want to have do not want to have just one arc that happens to be a series arc where let's say you're writing 3 books, it's developed in thirds and you're calling that a day. Oh, well, there's a series arc, but there's no individual book arc. No, wrong, false. No, won't work. Why won't it work? Because what's the reader going to attach to? Why should the reader care? Why is it a big deal? Who gives a shit? You are mandating then, if that's the case, you're mandating that the reader engage with the rest of the books in the series. That's a big ask for people, because if that first book sucks, they're not going to suddenly hold out hope the second and third and fifth and 24th or whatever get better, waiting for you to get off your ass and do what you should have been doing in the first book, which is this, by the way. Treat every book as though it is the only book the reader's going to read. Treat every book as though it is the only book in the series the reader's going to read. Because maybe they will only get their hands on the second book in the series for a while until they can either save up or find or borrow or scrounge or steal or whatever the other books in the series. You can't guarantee that everybody's always going to start with one. You can't guarantee that everybody's coming to it with this foreknowledge or this pre-existing relationship with these other sources of media that you're drawing on in terms of inspiration. Treat every book like it's the only thing the reader's reading from you, which means that book needs to be crafted in such a way that if we're choosing to build a character, that character growth is strong as hell. And we do that by crafting an open character where we have the potential for growth. Now, what growth? I don't know. That's up to you. That's your part in this experience. I'm giving you a blueprint, but you got to tell me what the building's going to look like. Just let there be space for growth. Should there be space for multiple growth? Sure, absolutely. But if you can't muster that because it sounds scary or confusing, or you're just not sure, just start with one. One's plenty. We can always reverse engineer it later so that by the way, there's also this new issue in this, second book or third book or fifth book. There are ways we can hide those seams, but for right now, just do the one, okay? Just one book, character arc, one part, series character arc. 2 different arcs happening to the same person, somewhat concurrently and coincidentally, okay? The more you relate those 2 things together, the less your story is going to feel structured, the more dull it's going to be, the more ill-formed and rushed it's going to be, because it's going to seem like all roads are racing towards a single conclusion. it's going to feel like you didn't think it all the way through, even if you did. So, make your arcs distinct. That's the character side of things. What's the character going to do over the course of this book? What's the character going to do over this course of the series? Answer those two questions, you'll get where you want to go, or at least start to. And then however many books you have, well, they move closer towards their end goal. But the individual book, individual arcs, they get answered at the end of the book. And your reader should be able to point to, hey, evidence, character changed. Ta-da. If you can do that, congrats, you have a character arc. But let's cross the divide again. Let's go back over here and look at plot. Because what happens if we don't do it for... What if we start with plot? What do we do? Well, good news. It's a lot of the same thing, only instead of where we talked about character arc, now we're going to talk about plot. We can have, and we need to have, a series plot that stretches from book one. No, not you. It's the S word that keeps triggering off my phone. Learned. I'm sorry, in chat, are you asking me the question or are you posing it rhetorically? What the point of the book? Did you want me to clarify that, or are you just rhetorical? Cool. Just wanted to make sure in case I had missed something. Back to plot. Our series plot is not, much like our character arc, is not made up of thirds or fifths or however many books it is, right? It's not made up of individual thirds. It's made up of complete separate things that accumulate together. So if we're writing a trilogy, it's one whole thing plus one whole thing plus one whole thing equals big picture. And if you're doing more than 3, then clearly you make the number bigger. 5, 10, 6, whatever. Even 2. Doesn't matter. Yes, you can have a 2-book series. It's a duology. Totally a thing. But each plot, singular, should be somewhat of a component to the series plot overall. To some degree. Your best bets are to usually tie your climaxes and the main central conflict of Climax, the big challenge of the story, oh my God, how are they going to defeat the monster? Tie that in some way to the series and the series plot arc, and the reader will be able to follow whatever the hell you're doing. If every book is a different case the detective solves over the course of a month, then when we get to 12 books, then all of a sudden we have a year's worth of case, and we're able to say that the 12th case involves all previous 11 months. And then we have a calendar level event. Or if we're using letters of the alphabet, every book is a letter of the alphabet. By the time we get to Z, we're tying together the previous 25. But remember, we're treating each book as though it is the only book in the series the reader will read. We're planning on that, so that when the reader sticks around, we get to feel good and they get to feel good. But we want our plot to have both an internal consistency, meaning internal to the book from cover to cover, one single book, but also a series consistency, so that even if we change directors from Chris Columbus to Alfonso Cuarón, the story still feels somewhat the same, even though it's very clearly not, because Chris Columbus is a less good director than Alfonso Cuarón. And you had better British people in the later movies. But that's a different story for a different day. The point is that if you're crafting by plot, don't sweat the series off the bat. Don't over-engineer the series. Think about the individual. Because you can always, in subsequent books, book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book whatever, figure out the other architecture you need to stitch things in place. This is not a case, this is not a time where you need to lay all the groundwork in book 1 because, oh my God, you have to understand everything so that in 12 books, when I reference the fact that someone had green shoelaces, you suddenly go, I remember that from page 8 of book 1. Don't do that to your reader. Don't do that to your reader. That's shitty. Don't do that to your reader. Be better than that. It's not a trivia contest to see who got you first. The plot of your book, cover to cover, at least in terms of plot construction, should take priority. Let's use a science fiction example. Let's suppose you're telling a story where your entire first book is a kid grows up to be a knight to go fight a monster, right? He's got to go fight the dragon. Cool. So long as he does that over the course of the book, by the time he's done, assuming he wins, because we want him to win because he's the protagonist in our case, then he will have established himself as a knight. He's established himself as somebody who fights a monster, kills the monster. He's somebody who overcomes an obstacle. These are all different avenues. They're called avenues of results. These avenues can tell you how to steer that character through subsequent stories. One very simple example, we see this all the time in film, is your character does X in the first film, and then all of a sudden they repeat X, but it's even bigger the next time. Oh, you're a car thief? Well, now you've got to steal 10 cars. Oh, you're a DVD drag racing group? Well, now you're going to be essentially the X-Men and G.I. Joe. That's the entire growth of the Fast and Furious franchise. That's called hierarchical expansion. Hierarchical expansion is what sort of like ripples in a pond or concentric circles that stack. We want to expand all the way through. And each ring is bigger than the ring on the internal, right? So as we go outward, we get bigger. That allows us to do something called power scaling. Power scaling is the idea that from book to book, as we move forward in the series, as we move up the series count, book 2 to book 3 to book 4, etc., our characters grow in power, the obstacles they face grow in power, the stakes rise. It's a much bigger deal. Book 3 is proportionally huge compared to book 1. In part, that's organizational, because we can just build and build and build and build and build. And in part, it's reward for the reader. Hey, you read about the story when the kid wasn't even a knight. Now we're talking about how the knight is going out to fight the big kingdom-ending monster. Payoff, satisfaction. Really, really critical. How you approach the plot speaks volumes for how you will handle the series. Because if you have one plot and you somehow, some way stretch it across multiple books, because it's the only plot you have, so that each single book is really 1/3 of the whole story, or 1/5, or 1/6, or 1/10, or whatever, your reader will not stick around. Because the reader wants that whole satisfying digestive process of consuming your story at once. So please make sure, if you're going to go build the plot, build according to plot, that we have something satisfying and complete unto itself. Now, those are our 2 starting points. And it's been an hour. Holy shit. Okay, so as to avoid doing this across 6 hours, let's expedite slightly, shall we? So, our next iteration, our next thing, once we start with a character or plot, we start telling our story. We're laying out the pieces. This happens, this happens, this happens. Here are the consequences. This is this. Character does that. Here's some dialogue. Here's some action beats. We lay out the story. When you reach a point in that story where you need to lay groundwork for something that comes up later, like fill in the blank thing number 5 is going to be a much bigger deal in a later book. How do I handle that? Well, the more time you spend on it now in book 1, even though book 2 or book 3 or book whatever number isn't out yet, but the more time you spend on it, the more attention from the reader you draw to it, the more spotlight you put to it. Hey, pay attention to this. Hey, look, that thing right there. The more you do that, the more the reader is going to expect, oh, this better come up now. Because you keep talking about it like it's a big damn deal. If it's not, if it's going to be a big deal later, then when later comes, then you get to make it a big deal. The example I was always given, the example I learned from, is let's say you plant a seed in the ground. A vegetable. Doesn't really matter what, but it's a seed in the ground. So long as you tend it and give it all it needs for the seed to sprout, it will eventually produce fruit. But you can't keep constantly poking that seed expecting the tomato to immediately appear in your hand. So if you're going to lay the groundwork for an item for later in the series, you got to understand at what stage in its development process it is when you're laying that thing down. If I'm in book 1 and I'm laying the groundwork for book 4, it's going to be a very, very small seed because I got a whole lot of time before something builds up to it. This isn't the same as being in book 4 and then needing that story tomato, if we're following my example, right? The choice is ultimately yours, though, as to how and when and to what degree and how much space you dedicate to each of these seeds for further down the road. However, keep this in mind. When you lay groundwork for future books, the story you're in doesn't pause. There's no okay, timeout story, I got to go do some other prep stuff. Nope, the story's still ongoing. The story is always ongoing because the reader is always looking to read it. Because you can't control when the reader sits down to read. Me, if I'm your reader, I don't know, let's assume hypothetically I'm your reader, I'm reading your story in 2 and 3 or maybe 3 and 5 page little snatches, a little bit here and a little bit there. I'm waiting for the laundry to finish, or I've got a couple quiet minutes at night and I'm not too fried from working, so I'm picking up little bits and pieces. Whereas someone like my mom, if she's your reader, well, first of all, if she's your reader, you're on easy street for sales. Because my mother will pick up a whole series and then communicate with you in terms of how you make it better. Because, well, my mom has heard me give these things so many times. She means well. She really does. But all the same, my mother's experience as a reader is grossly different than mine. I'm reading it in bits and pieces. She will digest a whole thing in a day and then write you notes. Because that's how she just wants your story to be better. She just wants to help. She's not doing it to be a jerk. She's going to try and point out constructive issues because that's what my mom does. And she tends to read a whole book in a day because, she's retired and what else is she going to do? She's got books and a couple podcasts and she cross stitches. So she's a much more captive audience when it comes to story craft and structure. But you can't control when your reader reads. And you can't control the urgency they may or may not feel for, oh my God, I got to get to book 5 because apparently in book 5 we're going to finally learn the mystery of the scarf. Maybe they don't give a shit as much as you do. Don't make it dependent on that. So we're crafting our story. We've got our character. They're progressing on their arc. The character is moving through their plot. They're doing whatever the plot is. They're doing whatever their arc is. The theme is percolating along. The story's going great. When we hit our climax, take note of our climax. Here's what's up with our climax. Keep in mind, or better off, take notes for your climax. What is it? What happens? What are some cool lines? What are some nice sentences you wrote? What are some feelings you're trying to evoke? What's the blueprint for your climax look like? Why is that important? Because those same feelings, those same ideas, maybe even some of the same lines, you can repeat them in subsequent climaxes in later books, and it will be yet another way you can tie things together. It's one of the reasons why all the Rocky movies end with a boxing match. Because that way you know what you're doing. That way you know what you're building towards. Rocky is probably not a great example, but I think it illustrates my point. Usually right around this point, somebody asks me a question, do I want my character arc to be ahead of my plot over the course of development? And I would love to give you a universal answer, but there is no universal answer here. Sometimes, yes, you want your character arc to be ahead of the growth in your plot. Sometimes you want your plot ahead of your character growth. Everything is going to be different. There are pluses and minuses to both. You, more or less, though, don't need to keep things totally in sync. Oh, we've made 2% plot growth. We have to make 2% character arc growth. Oh, we've gone up another percent. So everything moves up equally. We're not, it doesn't work like that. It's not mechanized. It's a pretty fluid thing. And there are going to be sections of the manuscript where events occur, because there's always something occurring. That's what an event is. There's something that occurs that is more character arc or more plot than it is the other. Some things are going to be totally 100% plot and have very little to do with the character becoming a different transformed person. Sometimes plot shit just happens. And that's fine. And sometimes things are going to happen that are relatively inconsequential to the overall plot, but they have incredible meaning to the characters. Because they're character-based. And that's fine. And sometimes it's going to be some mixed percentage of both. And that's fine too. There's no one set way to do this. Just understand that by the time we get to the end, and I'm dealing mostly in 3-act structure, by the time we get to the end, we've hit that climax. We have definitely affected the plot. There have been build-up and payoff and consequences and stakes and stuff, risk, danger, all that good stuff. And we're far enough along in the character arc that we have probably, making a wavy hand gesture, probably kind of sort of moved our character along as well. Or if we haven't directly because of the climax, we are just about to on the next page. They don't necessarily have to go step in step, paragraph for paragraph, line for line, but we're, as the story wraps up, we're trying to wrap everything up. We don't really want to have like a hanger-on. You want to try and avoid your cliffhanger. If you're going to do a cliffhanger, by the way, just to get it out of the way, if you're trying to do a cliffhanger, plot-based cliffhangers work a hell of a lot better than character arc-based cliffhangers. Because plots are way more immediate at that level. Example. A literal cliffhanger. Tune in next week to see if Batman and Robin will be able to escape the giant cake made of quicksand that Egghead has managed to, capture them in. Same bat time, same bat channel. That is way more immediate and way more, compelling us to go watch the next episode than the existential crisis of Dick Grayson remembering that he has a fractions test the next day. One's bigger than the other. Let it just be that way. So we're crafting our story. So we're shaping our plot. When we finish the book, the manuscript, the draft, we're finishing the draft at this point in our discussion, okay? When we finish our draft, we need to take the draft as a whole and all the notes we made as a whole, and we need to double check to make sure we've tied together the stuff we need for our series. So, does our book's plot feed into our series in some way, shape, or form? Does our book's character arc feed into our series arc in some way, shape, or form? Does our book's theme feed into any themes we want overall in our series? And when I talk about that, if our series themes are let's say standing up and doing the right thing, if that's our series theme, is our book an example of that or not? It can be, you can repeat, it's a theme. Each installment can be endemic of it. That's fine. More so than when you have a plot. You can't just keep using the same plot. But does your book do justice to the plans for your series? When we have elements that connect books, like a literal cliffhanger, perhaps. I don't know. It's an example. It's one of the many things I'm about to talk about. If there's a literal cliffhanger, have we left it in such a way so that when Benedict Cumberbatch falls off the building, we can then spend a year and a half wondering if it's like a bungee cord or a stunt double, and the internet can go berserk trying to figure it all out, because it couldn't just be that, dude jumped off a building. Did we leave enough room for the reader to chew on the material? Here's your next term. Probably one of the last terms, at least according to mine, it's one of the last terms in my list. Breathing room. Breathing room is the idea that between pieces in a series, there is enough time, space, distance, fill in the blank, moment, stuff, experience, whatever, between installments, so that even if the reader does not immediately pick up the next piece, the next book, the next whatever, the reader can get caught up quickly. Example. You've got a literal cliffhanger. Your hero is hanging on by their fingers. We can leave that character hanging on by their fingers until the end of all time if the reader never picks up the second book. If, for whatever reason, you start the second book not at that moment where the character is hanging by the fingertips, your reader's going to be pissed. Why? Because you will have given too much breathing room. You got to pick up where you left off. Unless you have very neatly tied things off. Positive example. Let's suppose the distance between each of your installments is a time jump. I don't know, make something up. 2 months, 60 days, 2 months. Between every installment, 2 months has passed. As long as you are consistent in that, the reader will be able to figure out what happened, what's changed, what's the same, and carry on from there. But if between some installments it's 2 months and other installments it's 20 minutes, there better be a damn fine reason why you're doing that. And you're not just doing it to demonstrate that you can yo-yo and bungee cord the reader around. Breathing room really matters for deeper, like books deep in series. Book 3 onward. Because once the book... So we'll talk about this more when we get to the marketing. Book 1 always has great excitement because it's the first one, because it's new. Book 2 has a lot of expectation riding on it because it's the sequel. But if you really want to figure out where an author excels craft-wise, go look at the third thing in a series. Because they're no longer new. They've ridden out their sophomore slump or the possibility of a sequel, and now they've got to like go do their own thing. But we'll talk about that when we get to the publishing marketing side of stuff. For now, we're crafting this draft. The nice thing about the drafting stage is that we can treat this manuscript as though it's not part of a series. Get it edited, get it read, get some feedback, all that stuff. Just like a regular book, just like a regular single book. Because right now, for all intents and purposes, it is a single book. Especially if it's a debut in a series, the first book in a series, and it's our first book out the door, or whatever. It's just one book, one time. I'm going to get a mouthful of tea so I don't cough on you. Any questions so far? Because now we will transition to the I have finished the book half of the discussion, and we'll jump to the publishing marketing side. Because basically what you're going to do after you draft, and I'm sorry, I have one bit of business in the draft stage, and then we'll jump over. But first, mouthful of hydration. Any questions so far? Yes, no, we're cool. All good. All right. Anybody else? Just a sound check, by the way. Sounds good? Everything cool? We're not, like, computer-wise, we're not freaking out. I just want to make sure we're all good. All right, rock and roll. Here we go. Here we go. One bit of business. Remember how we talked about, not that long ago, a couple minutes ago, we had talked about planting those seeds for subsequent books? Here's the flip side. Now we're into subsequent books. How do we handle catching the reader up? One thing I want to tell you before we actually get into like the how to do this. Do you know the most common writer who asks me how do I catch readers up on subsequent books? I hear that question more often than not from people who haven't even finished the first book. And for a long time, I was never sure why. And it was really only recently, like maybe in the last half a year, that it suddenly dawned on me why. Here's why. Now, maybe part of this is speculation, but it's at least my good guess. New writers, first-time writers, especially nervous first-time writers, want to know as much about the map going forward as possible well in advance so that they, I guess, assume they can do whatever they can do to control as much as they can control to guarantee as much as they can guarantee whatever outcomes they want. It doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. But they're damn sure going to try. So it doesn't matter that they haven't gotten their first book done yet. They're going to want to know how to take the stuff from the first book and you know, make sure the reader who's only read the second book gets it. Because they want to make sure readers stick around even though they haven't started reading yet. It's a very heightened kind of particular writer anxiety. So let me tell you then how to do it. Here's how you fill in the reader from what, the book or books prior that they haven't read. I'm going to give you one magic trick, and then I'm going to give you some just practical how-to, okay? I think that's a pretty fair balance. First, the magic trick. Come here. Come here, right here. Right here, right here. Look, here's the magic trick. You don't have to tell them everything. I'll say that again. You don't have to tell them everything. You don't. Let's say for whatever reason the first book I, the reader, get is book 6. I don't need You to spend 5 chapters of book 6 filling me in on the events of books 1 through 5. I should not have to go to a wiki or excessively Google your fandom site or fall into some kind of deep subreddit hole in order to understand what the shit is happening in your books. Why? Well, because rather than go to a wiki that's free, that doesn't cost me any money, I should be encouraged to go read your books, which means buying your book, which means you get to make a sale. Unless you're not interested in me buying your other book and you're just going to tell me everything I want to know. If that's the case, I mean, do you know the lotto numbers for next week? Because there's some shit I need to buy. You only have to give them. Now we're going to move to the practical stuff. You only have to give them, first, the immediately relevant stuff. So, whatever situation's ongoing currently in the story, the 3rd chapter of book 2, the 7th chapter of book 10, whatever. Is there anything from any of the previous work that's relevant to that present moment? That stuff you definitely need to mention. Why? Because it's one of the reasons why those earlier installments of stuff are going to help connect to the current stuff. Now, that's the obvious answer. That's kind of pretty obvious. Yeah, just obviously tell them the immediate, the related stuff. What else you got? Are there things that are directly contrary? Can we find some kind of binary and look at the flip side? If, for example, you have a running element in your work that every time your character encounters a shoebox, a monster jumps out. And we're not going to make this a meta thing. Let's assume that the character knows that shoeboxes are bad. We're not going to turn this into like a joke for the reader. That's shitty writing. But for now, let's assume that shoeboxes equal bad in your world. Every time then that there's a shoebox, before we open the shoebox of book 6, maybe we want to mention the shoebox of book 2. One time I secondary character. One time I opened this and a ghost jumped out. That's all you got to say. You don't need to break down. It was the ghost of the old sea captain from 103 years ago who walks the land once every certain number of Tuesdays, stalking the future victims of people who know what a beauty pageant is. Like, you don't need to detail every goddamn thing. It's not going to be on the final exam. You find the relationships between past information and the present story, and you tie them together. And if you need to recap some stuff so that the reader gets, oh, this is why we're doing this, this is why we can just very casually, get to this place, then you very succinctly and very clearly hit only the major key points that are related to and necessary to know to get us to our present moment. Everything from the past turns to serve the present moment. Because if you were just writing the past stuff and it has no relevance or very thin / very poorly explained relevance to the present moment, the reader is going to look at it like they've missed something. Because why are you just telling the reader this now? I'll give you an example. In Indiana Jones movies, particularly The Last Crusade, there's a moment where Indy looks out at some Nazis and goes, "Nazis, I hate these guys." Now, in part, that's a statement, describing his character. But in part, that is a payoff to this idea of, previously, Indiana Jones fought some Nazis. He didn't have to stop and explain, this one time I fought the Nazis and it had to do with the Ark. It was just, I don't like Nazis. It's the relevant information. That's all we needed to know. One of the hang-ups for a lot of writers is figuring out or trying to answer the question of what information does the reader need to know versus what do I write? And I have to tell you, that almost became an entire Monday night stream, and it still might be an entire Monday night stream all by itself. But the writer is in charge of what they tell the reader. So it's not that the reader needs 100% completion to unlock the achievement to win the book. If the information you're giving them directly serves the present event of the story or directly serves their better understanding of the present moment of the story, then they need to know that. Everything else is extra. That doesn't mean skip it. It just means that don't prioritize it and don't go overboard thinking that somehow you're pausing the story in order to detail the past, because you're not. You're just stalling. All right, let's bring this sucker home. So we do this process and we craft a draft. Maybe we craft multiple drafts, okay? A couple different drafts. How many drafts? I don't know. Every writer's different. In our hypothetical world, let's say it takes us 5 drafts. I'm making numbers up. I got 5 fingers on this hand. 5 drafts. 5 drafts. And we decide, well, you know what we're going to do? Let's walk through both sides of this. Because I'm sure some people checking this out are going to go traditional and some people are going to go self-publishing. And that's fine. And I want to make sure I detail it both for whomever's listening. Up to this point, in order to get to this, let's go this way. In order to get to this point, the manuscript is complete. The manuscript is in its best shape. You are no longer doing shit to it. You're not adding extra characters. You're not dicking around trying to rewrite the ending. It's done. It's done, and it's clean, and it's polished, and you've got a copy of the file in some file format that's nice, neat, and pretty. We need to have those things before we can move forward. I'm assuming you've got those things for the next part of this discussion, okay? Let's start with traditional publishing. Here we go. Traditional publishing. We're going to need a pimp. So we're going to have to write a query letter. What do we use? What information do we have at our disposal to craft that query letter? We have this entire story. We have our not yet written plans for deeper in the series. All of that becomes fuel for our query letter. Do we need to detail all the fuel? Do we need to burn every single log in the fireplace in order to generate a fire? No. But we want to make sure we have the maximum number of pieces of wood available for our fire. So maybe we don't give all 22 pieces of information in this query letter because we only have 250 something words. So maybe we pick and choose. How do we pick and choose which pieces? What kind of query letter are you writing? Do we want to only talk about the character? Do we want to only talk about the plot? Do we only want to come at the story this way? Do we only want to focus on this one story element? Writing is the act of making decisions. What decision did you make? That's the thing we're going to frame this query letter around. No, I don't know if it's any good. It's not about being good. It's about whether or not you can do this. If you take your story and your story is... if your story is... What movie did I just watch the other night? Oh, God, it was this terrible thing. Some kind of weird romantic comedy. If you've got some kind of weird romantic comedy where you've got like 3 couples and they're all supposed to be dating other people, not the person they're in the relationship with, and the comedy's really bad, you might want to frame that query letter around the mismatched couples, because that's probably the easiest way to... Let's do Battleship. All right, yeah, because we covered Battleship on Patreon. That's fine. Let's do Battleship. So if we're pitching Battleship, our query letter is about Battleship, We can frame it around our screw-up character who needs to become a leader because that's the central protagonist of the story. We can frame it around the alien attack because that's the antagonist of the film. We can frame it around the adaptation of a physical board game into a film. We can frame it around just sort of the paint-by-numbers action story that it is. Loads of different ways to come at this story. Which one's best? I don't know. Which one gets us to our desired effect? Just pick one. Just pick one. Just pick one. Let's assume for the sake of argument, we frame this query letter all about our... we frame it all about our adaptation of a board game into a movie property. Sure, let's go hyper-capitalistic for this, right? We're talking about how great it is that we can turn a board game into a film. We talk about this particular board game, this particular film. What else do we include? Well, this could be the start of a board game cinematic universe. This could be the first in a series where we take a look at other games and adapt them, like Chutes and Ladders or Mousetrap, which was a movie, or Operation, or Othello, which is also a movie, or Mancala, or we find, loads of different things. You want to, in your query, very casually, very casually, very, very, very casually, lead the reader, without demanding their attention, but lead the reader that, hey, this, there's series potential here. Do you want to write that in a query? Sometimes. Do you not? Sometimes. How do you know? Did you write it or not? Make a decision. When you query, whatever it is you're querying, you are only ever querying that particular book plus, or if you're in the Midwest, and the possibility of the future. Other books in the series, other properties, other whatevers. But first and foremost, that query is for that book. So you want to focus your efforts on marketing, because the query is your first line of marketing, on marketing the elements of that book. Battleship, Fast and Furious, Dark Knight Rises, that weird movie where that girl tries to cook like Julia Child. Stuff. When you query, you are not necessarily guaranteeing that it will be a series, even if you designed it to be a series. Because a publisher can just say, I want that book. I don't give a shit about the others. Here's what you need to know. If you come screaming out of the gate going, oh my God, I have a series. There's all this shit. It's got these things and this things and this things and that and then you're going to freak them out, because when you talk about it as a series first, and oh, by the way, I guess it has story stuff, but it's mostly a series, you are essentially communicating to the publisher or your pimp, hey, you're not just saying yes to this, you're saying yes to the next 7 things. It's a larger commitment. I know I'm an untested commodity. I am a new writer. But I need you to say 7 yeses, not just 1 yes. To put it in people terms, imagine going on a date where instead of just saying yes to the first date, in their first conversation with this person, hey, how you doing? Within 3 minutes of that conversation, they say something like, you have to say yes to 10 dates with me right now. How would you feel? How would you feel? That's exactly what you're doing when you scream in very obvious, unsubtle, unflattering ways. This is the first book of a series. That's very different than saying this has series potential. Publishers like potential, Not only because it gives them the opportunity for success, but it also gives them an out if things go poorly. And if you're the sort of writer who's immediately assuming, oh my God, it's going to go poorly, we need to have other discussions about other topics, because just because the possibility exists of it going poorly does not guarantee that for you it will go poorly. So you query. You get representation. You find a publisher. All your ducks are in a row. You perhaps qualify for some amount of in your life, which is fine and good for you. But now you have to market this thing. So let's put a pin in that for a second. Let's go over here and talk to the self-publishing people. No pimp here, but you're on your own. You finish your draft. You're going to need a cover. You're going to need an editor. You're going to need to pay for these things. It's a bit expensive. I should point out that the publisher also pays for them too. So if you own your publisher, you still have to pay those like bills. Like some human being somewhere is paying for that. You know that, right? The money just doesn't miracle itself into existence. It's just a matter of who's paying for it. Over here on the self side, though, you're paying to make the book. Cover, back blurb, ISBN, editing, etc. You put all your pieces together. You load it to your site of choice, whether that's your own individual website, a river-themed megacorp, a fruit-themed megacorporation, some other bookseller, wherever, doesn't matter. But now that the book is available somewhere, now begins the marketing, which now begins sort of the back third of our discussion. How do you market a series? Unlike bingeable culture. So at the time of recording, the second season of The Witcher comes out, I think, in 4 days, the end of this week. It's Monday at the time of recording. I believe it comes out on Friday. In theory, it's bingeable all at once. And that's very different than, say, something like on Disney Plus, which is doing weeklies, or Amazon, which is doing weeklies. And our consumption is affected. When we buy books, usually short of individual sales or packaging, we're buying one at a time. So how do you get a series that sells well? Each individual book sells well, which means we treat each individual book as though it were a single thing to sell. It just so happens that it is part of a larger set. And if one item sells well and it's of this quality, we want to create the suggestion for our consumer that the other things of this product line, this series, are also good and we should keep consuming them. How do we do that? Well, from a self-publishing standpoint, we start with the superficial and we become more specific. You're going to want uniformity in your covers. At the very least, a color palette that matches. Or a typography that's consistent if your color palette's going to change per book. You're going to want a titling convention, some kind of consistency in your title. Oh, it's 2 words? Cool. It's always a prepositional phrase? Awesome. It's always going to start with the same letter? Great. Whatever. You're going to want to find some kind of consistency that you can stick on the outside package of this book. Because no matter what the contents are, because we're not there yet, but at least the outside being consistently shaped is going to make a difference. Because if it all looks the same, it's going to be assumed to be the same. That's part one. That's why all the packages of M&Ms look the same on the shelf. Because we're trying to convey to you that no matter which one you pick up, you're going to get M&Ms. You're not going to suddenly pick up one pack of M&Ms and get piranhas and chainsaws. That would be weird. So we create visual uniformity of message. typography, titling, cover, art, etc. What's our next thing that we manage? Back blurb. I will probably end up doing in January an entire stream just on back blurbs because they are their own beasts. They have rules in terms of size like query letters, but they have structure in terms of sales copy, and they have familiarity in terms of synopsis. They sort of sit in this weird Venn diagram. So it's going to end up being its own thing. And there's also a ton of rules like, well, there's social contract rules like please don't use so many ellipses versus rules like you have to have more than one paragraph. But it's complicated, and it's bigger than I can get into here in the next like 15, 20 minutes. So suffice to say, your back blurb, that's the stuff on the back of your book, on the back cover of your book, the back cover text, whatever they're calling it now in the hashtag writing community. What that needs to do in some combination is the following things. It needs to inform the possible consumer as though they've never read anything in this series. If this were the first book of the series they're picking up, it needs to do that. It needs to give them some kind of plot expectation as to what's going on in this book. It needs to give some kind of expectation as to what sort of character the main character or protagonist group is or are. Because we want the reader to be informed as to what possibly kind of sort of sounds like what's happening in the book and kind of sort of possibly who it's happening to. Third thing it needs to do. It needs to use some amount of persuasive language, not hyperbole. This is not social media, but we need to use some amount of persuasive language to make the overall presentation of this book sound appealing. Maybe we're going to use poll quotes from our famous author friends. Maybe we're going to use awards we received from a contest. Maybe we're going to use, things we got from reviews. Maybe we're going to just flat out use adjectives that we identify our own book with. If no one else is going to call our book sensational, maybe we're going to have to call it sensational today. That's fine. But we're going to use some amount of persuasive language plus a level of information about character and plot and a little world. Don't forget your story triangle. But some amount of persuasion plus information to drive the reader towards a sale. A back cover blurb has what's called an implied call to action. An explicit call to action would literally say, buy this book. You usually see that in like nonfiction spaces or with like tech bros because they want to make like finger guns at you, bro, and tell you to crush it and rise and grind and other toxic masculine bullshit things. But in fiction, we don't really bully the reader like that. In fiction, we sort of assume that the reader has a brain in their head and will either make the decision to buy the book or not. Information plus persuasion equals possible sale. For the sake of our discussion, we are assuming the sale goes through. Once the sale goes through, we're all big winners. Yahtzee, we can go home now. Because what the reader does with your book once they're done the sale, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We want them to read it. We want them to love it. We want them to become a lifelong consumer of your work and tell 2,000 of their friends to also become lifelong consumers of your work. But there's just no guarantee that's going to happen. So don't force it. They bought it. You have their money. We can just move on now. We can do loads of things inside the book to encourage them to leave positive reviews or share it with friends, but we can never force it. That's the immediate stuff. Now, let's go handle the trickier, wranglier bits. The messy stuff, like social media. Now, part of this is going to be dependent on our platform because tweets are shorter than newsletter posts. And newsletter posts can be less visual than Instagram posts. And All of those things are far more static compared to a TikTok. Depending on our social media avenue of choice, we're going to have to approach this in different ways. The radio version, the audio version of a movie trailer sounds different, comes across differently. As the kids say, hits different than if we were to watch it like in a theater on a big ass screen versus watching it on our phone versus watching it on TV. All these different avenues have different pluses and minuses. The consistency you bring, independent of platform, though, is what a reader is looking for when it comes to identifying the series. Once you start selling things, whether it's 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, 10 books, whatever, once you start selling things, the more consistency you can have in your favor, the better for your series. Now, some of that's going to be in-story consistency. Like, your main character is your main character until your main character isn't anymore. Or you always seem to write this character in this genre. Or there's always this kind of plot twist. Or there's always, this kind. It's always science fiction. It's always medieval fantasy. It's always, detective story. It's always a legal thriller. It's always a case with a single protagonist or a single whatever. Consistency in story helps solidify the feelings a reader would have in and around that kind of experience. The reason why people read, I'm going to name famous authors, the reason why people read John Grisham novels is not because of their deep academic understanding of the English language. It's because they know what they're getting into with a John Grisham novel or a Stephen King novel. And I understand that when I say these things, people get real feisty because it's the internet and they want to immediately sit down and like go all in on well, that's not a good author or these books suck. I don't give a fuck what you think. I know those guys sell books and they have careers. And some of their books are very good. And some people like all their books, and some people like none of their books, and some people like a few of their books. And it's up to each individual one of us to decide what we like and don't like. And just because the internet facilitates us to bitch, piss, and moan at incredible volumes at incredible frequencies doesn't mean everybody's right all the time. I like John Grisham books. I like some more than others. I like Stephen King books. I like some more than others. You like them all? Great. You don't? Great. I don't care. But from a consumer standpoint, you have to treat this as though your consumer might make the sale. Not that you have to climb uphill both ways across lava and broken glass barefoot in order to convince them. We're not begging for their attention. You want to do what you can to encourage it. Encourage the sale, I mean. So we use in-story consistency so that we know what to expect, but we also want to use what's called serial consistency and authorial consistency. Serial consistency is that no matter what, if we're writing with this character, writing this series, the reader can have an expectation of, oh, well, I read book 1, I didn't read book 2, 3, and 4, but I got back in on 5. So I know more or less what to expect because it's going to have some of the same stuff going on. The series has consistency between its pieces. Each book is a year of a person's life. Each book is a month in a calendar. Each episode is a part of a greater narrative. Authorial consistency is something entirely under your control. While you write, however many books you write, you are going to get better as a writer. It's just the way craft evolves. Your first book is going to be less good, technically, than your 20th book. Because you will have just been writing more. You will have gotten smoother at revising. You will have gotten better at putting your words into pictures. You will have gotten, your pictures into words. You will have gotten better at explaining things. You will understand your characters and your ideas, and you'll know what you're doing. You'll have more confidence. It's easier. Slightly. There's different pressures, but On some hand, the production level, it's easier. And you're better at it. You know what you're getting. It'll be better quality, but we know what to expect. The reader knows what they're getting into. The wrinkle here, and here's the marketing trick, is that you're never aiming for the readers who already know what you sound like. Because they're either in or they're not. They're either the people who already know what Stephen King books are like, so they're going to pick up a Stephen King book because they like Stephen King books, or they're not. You're aiming for the people who have never encountered you before. Here's a very interesting thing I want you to think about. Very recently, over this weekend, apparently a very successful TV show had its season finale. And by every email and newsletter I got today, that season finale was apparently phenomenal. And it really made like huge headlines and big giant news, and it was very successful. I've never seen the show, but based on the strength of everybody talking about how great this finale was, and it's like the third season finale, I will go back to the beginning in season 1 and watch it all the way through. Because if the finale was that good, holy shit, I bet this whole thing's great. You have to account for that kind of reader experience. Just because you have 5 books on the shelf because book 5 just came out doesn't mean the reader's going to grab 5 and then work backwards. It doesn't also mean they're going to start with 1. Sometimes they're going to grab the cover that looks the coolest. You can't control that. It's sort of like a subway train. You can't necessarily control where the reader gets on. And you can't really control how long they ride the ride. But while they're riding the ride, you can provide the best experience for them possible. You're aiming for the readers who aren't already bought in, the readers who aren't already coming for your work because they're new. And it's through new consumers that you get growth. And through new consumers and growth that you get sales. So whether we're going traditional publishing and we're sales-oriented, or whether we're self-publishing and we're audience-oriented, by aiming for the slightly new edge of things, you are always pursuing growth rather than stagnation. Yeah, you're gonna make sure the people who always buy your stuff have enough. That's a given. That's a different discussion, though. But here we're trying to grow. We're trying to push the same stuff out with the strength of its consistency, the strength of its quality, the combination of information plus persuasion to push and grow to reach new people. If you want a non-book concept here, proselytization, the conversion of people, or the awareness, the raising of awareness to people towards religious and non-secular thought. I think it's a really great comparison here because a lot of those religions haven't changed in thousands of years. They haven't updated the stories. I've checked. Jesus does not suddenly get an iPhone in the new version of the Bible. Buddha doesn't show up in a new fresh pair of kicks, telling everybody he's got it, like go check out this new food pop-up. No. Those stories stay the same because the appeal of them is in their consistency and in how they are applied to people who have not already heard the message. They are applied to people who have not already gotten an awareness of what the content is. And if you're listening to this and going, oh my God, John's advocating for a religion. No, I'm not. I'm saying, look at the marketing model they use. It's effective. Take a look at it for your own work. Aim for the new people. So that any book they grab off the shelf, in any order at any time, rewards them in the immediate with, oh my God, this was a really good book. And in the long term of, oh my God, this is a series, I can get more like this. Great. And that's how you build a series that sells well. Individual installments stacked on top of each other, hierarchically. Please notice that the same sort of hierarchical organization to attract consumers mirrors the hierarchical organization we did an hour and 51 minutes ago when we were talking about laying out individual plot and series plot and individual arc and series arc. It's all hierarchical. I will get that word out right. It's all progressive hierarchy. Things stack upon each other in dependent ways. And that is the end of my 6 pages of notes. Are there any questions? Notice that I didn't demand certain antagonists or certain plot twists or that there has to be this every number of 100 pages, because it doesn't. That's up to you. How you make a series selling well is that you craft each individual book the best you can. So the contents of that book are up to you. You're the author. Writing is the act of making decisions. So just make some decisions. Are there any questions? You have a question. All right, fire your questions away. Go for it. What do you got? If the only consistency is the genre of story, would it still constitute would it still count as a series? The only consistency is the genre, meaning you, the author, only write in this genre, but you're all over the place in terms of what you're writing? No. You get some authorial consistency that way. Like, I only write urban fantasies, but the principal blocks of series are story based more so than genre. And it should be pointed out that if you do cross genre lines in a series, that's fine. Like, it's hard to do. It's possible. You can tell a series where each book in a series is a different genre. It takes a lot of planning, but you can do it. But your consistency needs to extend beyond just, I'm in this pool splashing around. You need some in-story stuff to constitute a series, which is why it's usually character. Well, I'm glad I could answer your question. Thank you so much for asking it. Yeah, you can have. Again, it just comes down to planning. Okay, so let's just play this out. Book number 1 is my science fiction book. Book number 2 is my horror book, because horror and science fiction are pretty genealogically close narrative-wise. And then my third book is dystopic, because it naturally follows horror and science fiction that we'd end up with a dystopia. I don't know. I'm making things up. It's a wild example. But you'd want to try and find genres that naturally feed into each other for some reason, either because of plot or character growth. Because if you were to hopscotch radically all over genre lines, like, I'm going to start writing a romance novel that suddenly becomes a fantasy story that suddenly becomes a legal thriller, the reader is going to get lost. Because your genres are so disparate and so disconnected and don't seem to have a natural way of connecting to each other. your reader invariably is going to end up picking pieces. I like this, I like this book, skip that one. And that's a position you, the author, will very seldom win in. You will very seldom grow a consistent audience with. Because if I'm picking favorites, then there's definitely going to be stuff I'm not picking, which is what you want to try and avoid. Similar to what we talked about in last week. Was it last Monday? It feels like a million years ago when we were talking about MPOV. Because we don't want to create that idea where readers can skip around the book and pick and choose the chapters they want to read. We want to make sure each chapter is so well crafted they keep reading. Likewise, you want to make sure your story, even though it changes genre, is so consistently well crafted and connected to each other that the parts don't feel skippable. Good question. Are there any others? Yes? No? We're good? Okay, if you're watching this stream, just heads up. If you're watching this stream, either straight on Twitch or on YouTube tomorrow, please know that I am not in the habit of checking my LinkedIn profile. So if you are the very nice person leaving me numerous comments on LinkedIn, please notice I'm not replying to you because, one, I don't remember my LinkedIn password, and two, I don't use LinkedIn. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. I'm assuming they're positive. I'm not going to go look. But yeah, it's all right if I just, come find me on a different platform and I'll happily answer your questions. Thank you so much for being here for the stream. I appreciate it. That's all I have. So let's get out of here. Let's package this sucker up, shall we? The next time I will talk to you guys will be Wednesday this week. So that's 2 nights from now on December the 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Writers Chat. The questions are really good. They're not particularly contentious. I was informed apparently that Book Talk, when I use the word spicy to describe the caliber of questions, apparently spicy refers to sex acts on Book Talk, which is juvenile and weird. Reminds me of like 8th grade cafeterias. But yeah, they're not like spicy. There's a little contention to them. There's a little bit of tension in them. But I in no way, shape, or form am I suggesting some sort of pre-teen or early teen sexual hootenanny. I'm just going to answer some questions and tell you some things that other places and other people probably aren't telling you. That's all. So, yeah, not terribly spicy questions, but there's some good ones. If you're interested in what they are, you can jump on the Discord, which you can access through patreon.com/John helps you create. That's YOU create. John helps you create over on Patreon. And it'll get you access to the Discord and your lovely $2 a month. Literally allow these cats, which are sitting on me right now, to stop starving because, I clearly am, mistreating them as they sit on top of me most of the day. And you also pay for, the lights and gas in the car and all good stuff. So patreon.com/John helps you create. Jump on the Discord, check out the questions. Otherwise, everybody, I will see you on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern right here on Twitch for the Writers Chat. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. I apologize for the bot and various other chat-based shenanigans. It's been sorted out. All right, guys. Have a good night. I'll talk to you very soon. See ya.